This video is by Inclusion Ireland, the National Association for People with an Intellectual Disability, and it's to tell you about our budget submission for 2024. Each year, the government bring out a report that they call the budget. The budget will tell us what the government plans to spend money on for 2024. A budget submission gives people a chance to tell the government what they think that they need to spend money on. Inclusion Ireland members want the government to know that there are certain things that they are worried about the most. Housing and independent living support. Article 19 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability protects your right to live where and with whom you choose. But over 40% of the people that we surveyed said that they can't choose where they live as they don't have a package of support or services in place. For Budget 2024, Inclusion Ireland calls for better access to personalised budgets, training for staff and supporters about the UNCRPD and rights, provide money for community and rights-based approaches, and develop better systems for accessing personal assistance hours based on need and not diagnosis. Access to services. More than 4 out of every 10 people told us that access to services was the most important issue to them. A lot of therapy and support teams across the country have roles empty. Over half of the families had no support service for their children. Budget 2024 must provide for full-time person-centred services to people who only have access to day services on a part-time basis. Funding should be a path to creative ways of supporting people so that they can make choices for themselves. These could be things like personalised budgets and community-led housing. Cost of disability. Half of the people we surveyed find it hard to pay their bills. Research that was done for the government in 2021 told us that the cost of disability can be over €9,000 and sometimes nearly €12,000 per year. In this budget, we call for more money for the disability allowance so people can afford to pay their living costs. Create a cost of disability payment. Make a special fund for equipment, technology, and other important aids and appliances that help people to live their lives. Education. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says that disabled people have the right to education and have the same chances and choices as everyone else. But nearly 30% of parents told us that the school place their child has does not have the right supports for them, and only half of school leavers had access to advice about getting a job. Inclusion Ireland calls for funding to support smaller classes, funding for therapists under the School Inclusion Model, or SIM, and special needs assistance in mainstream schools. Better training about disability, rights, and ways to stop seclusion and restraint, and access to career guidance for all disabled students. Employment. Ireland has one of the lowest employment rates in Europe for disabled people, at just over 30%, and it gets even lower for people with intellectual disabilities, 17%. When we asked what would help people to get a job, they told us training and on-the-job learning support with interviews, and better transport. For Budget 2024, Inclusion Ireland calls for the government to invest in employment supports for people with intellectual disability, from career guidance in schools, through the transition out of school and on to job coaches. Open a wage subsidy scheme to people working less than 20 hours. And increase the limit of income disabled workers can earn before their disability allowance and benefits are taken away. Supported decision-making and advocacy. The Assisted Decision Making Act, or ADMA, finally started on the 26th of April 2023. The new Decision Support Service, or DSS, started at the same time. It will need enough money to work properly. Children also need a way to have their voices heard and be able to make choices about their lives. The Decision Support Service must have all of the things it needs to support people to make choices about their lives. This includes accessible information for everyone. The state should give money to create an independent advocacy service for children. You've been watching the Inclusion Ireland budget submission video for 2024. For the full version of our budget submission and other publications, go to www.inclusionireland.ie. Inclusion Ireland receives support from the Scheme to Support National Organisations for this work. The SSNO is government funding administered by Pobl. For further information, contact Guillaume Jacquinot at 086 035 3888